Hey Sam,
Hey Bob, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to see you.
Can you see me?
I can't, but I can hear you.
Oh, because my I don't have an option to turn on my camera. It's just not showing.
Let's see.
And let me also, I'm almost out of
Should
batteries. So let me quickly, one sec.
okay.
I saw your email. It's not live, right? So it's like you wanna cut it, right? So it's okay that I
Hey,
quickly plug in
hey
my.
Bob, how are you?
I am
Oh,
doing
hello.
great. For you?
Good. Um, it is recorded. We have some people filling in here, Bob. You should
Oh, okay. One second.
yeah, it's okay. We can cut that. Oh, it looks like you declined to be a panelist, but I could re-add you as a panelist and you should be able
That's
to.
funny because I'm not touching. Let me quickly. I'm really sorry about that. I just joined as a panelist. Let me do that again. Here we go.
Perfect.
Now we're getting somewhere. Oh, and now it says that I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. It says.
Hmm. Let's see. You should be able to. Maybe try again.
This looks good. Something. Yes, here we go.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, let me close this little filler. Oh, here we go. A little sunlight. Yes. Nice to see you. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. Where are you calling in from?
I'm now in Amsterdam.
Nice.
So
Good place to
I ju
be. Summer picking up there.
yes. Yes, it is. But however, yesterday I was still in San Francisco
Mhm.
and the weather there was better than here. But it is what it is.
Has the jet lag hit you yet?
Uh, Not really, because I was able to yesterday. The trick is always on day one or the day that you arrive. For me, at least, the trick is just not don't sleep. Just stay awake, go to bed at like 9 or 10 p.m. and then just sleep. And that's what I did. So I feel great.
Good, good. Yeah, it's easier said than done in my experience. So it's good you
Yes. Yep.
ironed that out. Awesome. Well, great to talk to you again, Bob. Just quick intros. Bob's the founder and CEO of Weaviate, the AI native vector database. I'm Sam Arabi, the COO here at Ori. We're building an AI native GPU cloud. So I thought we could do a fireside chat, Bob, and talk about
Great.
some topics that I think are near and dear to your heart, mostly around servicing the enterprise with AI native tooling, specifically vector databases, and some of the challenges that the buyers in these environments face,
Yeah.
and talking about how organizations can actually combine some of these tools like RAG, Weaviate's vector database, Ori's GPU capabilities, either on a on-premise environment or perhaps for you, it could be private cloud and talk about some of these differences. But kind of just to get started, what would you say is the main insight you're seeing today for the enterprise trying to adopt AI native tooling just in general? Before we zoom in, like where are you seeing the challenges, the opportunities? What are you kind of seeing out there as you're looking at your client base?
So there's two, if I may answer two rather than one. The uh the first one is from a purely from a technical perspective, no, an operational perspective, I would say. And that we see like the nature of the vector index, basically, right? It's very memory intensive, right? So for a lot of companies who want to go to who want to use a vector database, especially if they have a large use case, there was like they just couldn't make the business case. They're like, we love the technology, we see the value, but if we, for all our own customers, if we need to store all the data in memory all the time, that is just well, we can do that. So in Weaviate, we've been investing a lot on like data offloading, hot storage, cold storage, and so on and so forth. And now all of a sudden, it becomes affordable to do these large, billion scale use cases, multi-tenancy use cases, and that kind of stuff. So that's one thing, right? So that's more the operational thing, which was hard to know in the early days because you don't know how people will use it and how people will consume the service at scale, right? So that's
Yep.
one. The second one is the is around the stack. So the stack that's emerging around AI or Gen AI, if you will, is different, right? So how people work with it, how people build, how people deploy, languages that people use, and so on and so forth. And that is something we're also heavily leaning into, right? So where we help people. So I think those two would be my answer. That's very and it's new because it's like it's not a something like Weaviate is not like a um compare it with like what you guys do, right? So it's not that you say, okay, we have CPU and now we have a
Right.
faster CPU. No, 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 no. So you have CPU and now we have like something with GPUs, right? Which is different. It's just different use case. It's a different way how you consume and how you use them. And that is for a vector database is very similar. It's just you use it in a different way than a than another database.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's interesting. It sounds like on the storage front in this new market that's formed for vector databases in the enterprise, it's the challenge for the enterprise buyers has been going back to their organization and forecasting storage needs in line with costs, like cost predictability. It sounds like that's you sense that's kind of steadying off as you're looking at the conversations your teams are in, or do you still see that being something that's relatively unsolved, or is it just you're driving so much affordability with the software now that storage is getting commoditized and it's kind of going away?
So uh it's starting. It's showing the
Starting.
first signs of going away, right? But there are two important things there. So the first thing is doing a database in 2024, or I mean, we started in 2019, but and now in 2024, there's certain things that people expect that they can do with a database, right?
Great.
Um, uh, 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 so that can be related to how you deal with storage, how you deal with compute, how people consume the database, that kind of stuff, right? The second thing is like the that stuff is kind of known. The second thing is like how do you do that for the vector index? That is not a it's not that you can just Google that or nowadays ask ChatGPT and get an answer. But that's an unsolved problem. So that's what we're solving. But it's
Right.
showing those first signs. And what's happening that in the slipstream of that, so with those costs going down in the slipstream, bigger use cases can go to production. And
Yep.
out of that, you also get other things you need to deal with from scalability point of view. So that and we're not there yet. So that will be an ongoing thing for the coming for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, when you see your client base with all the different use cases, model building happening in different verticals, industries, different types of maturity, whether it's a large enterprise or a scale up that has highly sensitive data, how do you see the vector database panning out from a deployment perspective? Do you think it's going to be a healthy split between on-prem, VPC, and multi-tenancy? Do you see it being skewed to one of those options? Like, I know other database markets, like for example, Databricks, really early on, based on what I understand, is they said, hey, no more VPC or on-prem deployments, everyone's going multi-tenancy, and they kind of set the objective criteria of adopting the technology for the market, but not every market hangs out that way. On the database side, are you seeing like an insight for the enterprise, especially, or scale-ups with sensitive data on which deployment path makes the most sense for them typically?
So that's a great question. And okay, I need to unpack this, right? Because this is actually a great question. And so nowadays, how people want to consume a database is very different, right? So if you want to consume Weaviate, there are basically three ways how you can do it. There's actually more. There are more ways, but for example, we also have embedded. But I'm gonna park that for now because that's a whole different story. But
Right.
from a production point of view, so you have, of course, open source deployments, right?
Yep.
you have the what we call enterprise cloud, and we have serverless. And the big difference between serverless and enterprise cloud is that within serverless, we just take care of the management of memory, CPU, and those kind of stuff, and that's based on just on your consumption. And then we have enterprise cloud that is kind of the opposite, where the customer gets control of a CPU, memory, a disk, and those kind of things, because at large scale, that has an influence based on the different use case that we have. Now, if you look at a company like Databricks, what you mentioned, what they're doing and their strategy makes 100% sense, because I mean, there's nothing better than being able than managing it for your customer and then also having that control for your customer. That's a win-win. Why is that control important? Because pricing might play a role, right? So depending on the use case, right, you can structure it for your customer in an ideal, optimal way. So that is also at Weaviate, that's the holy grail of our funnel, if you will, right? But what we often see, what's a very common pattern is this. Smaller companies might start with open source and go like, hey, we're very happy with this. We want the serverless. We just want to swipe a credit card and just start small and then scale with the. What we see with enterprise customers is that they often also start open source. And then before they're willing to take the step to what we call enterprise cloud, then there's this in-between step where they say, hey, can you help us with support in the VPC? Now, I completely understand why a company like Databricks might say like, okay, hey, we're not going to do that, right? We just do only our enterprise cloud offering. For Weaviate, that's a little bit different because, of course, we're a younger company. So we're growing together with these customers. So these
Right.
customers are aware that enterprise cloud is by far the best option. But I can imagine that if you have a production use case and you have especially sensitive data, and there's a new company like Weaviate, and you go like, before that we all do all that kind of stuff, let's just have an in-between step. And one thing that we now even start to see is a hybrid model of that. So where people buy our enterprise cloud for staging environments and that kind of stuff, but the production environment that they still feel a little bit more comfortable if that's in their own VPC.
Right.
And for now, we're not saying no to that. So basically we help everybody. Regardless if you are starting $25, swipe your credit card serverless, or if you're saying like we have a very, we need a dedicated we've hit enterprise cloud setup, or if you say, hey, we need help with the in the VPC deployment, we help currently with all three of them. And what we do not do is it's if somebody runs the production database in the garage, that we don't do that. But it's
Right.
for the rest, we try to help as much as we can.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, at Ori, I see a very similar dynamic, obviously completely different context, but we provide an AI native GPU cloud. So in our cloud, you can start on demand, log in, vision GPU,
Yeah,
actually and AI go, it's flexible, you stand up. Maybe you're trying out a use case in training or several use cases. However, there comes a time where teams need to reserve some compute for a longer term and they want some price flexibility. So we absolutely do that. And then the holy grail for companies is to build a private cloud. And for them, it's about selecting the GPU type, your storage type. Do you want VAS? Do you want Weka? Because there's high performance compute storage now built for the specific needs of AI builders. And then there's also networking. So there's InfinityBand, there's other options as well from NVIDIA. And sort of what we're seeing is companies come in, spin up an instance or two on demand, perhaps hit a point where they're ready to really scale up, and then they're buying in the orders of tens, sometimes more of millions of dollars of GPUs, but building it in a private cloud. And so that flexibility is very important for our clients, as is, it sounds like yours. Um, have you found any best practices for your audience going through that buying cycle in the enterprise, whether it's, I don't, DevOps, IT, engineering, procurement? Like, how does your sort of go-to-market team or your engineering or product team support those conversations, or what are the key insights, I guess, you're seeing? Because I know how challenging it is for an organization to use the AI native tools they want to use because of these sensitivities, you could say. So you kind of elaborated on that, but I'm curious if there's any other insights you've seen emerging from the field on that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think the answer might not be what you're expecting,
Probably
but the answer is education.
got it.
So we spend a lot of time and effort on educating our community,
Right,
and that ranges from more on the enterprise side, uh, with analysts and that kind of stuff, to on the complete other end of the spectrum, really developer focused content about AI, about AI native. What are the do's? What are the don'ts? How do you bring this stuff to production? Example projects. We do the deep learning AI courses. We do the LinkedIn course on vector DBs with Reviate, well, and so on and so forth. And the reason that we do that is because I am convinced that if you educate people also, or a better way, educate sounds a little bit negative, but if you help people to be successful with their use case early on, I just think they're more likely to buy and less likely to churn.
right.
And indirectly related to your question, but related to what you just said, is that, sometimes if I play devil's advocate, you could say, and I'm by the way curious if you agree with this or not, but could be for Ori, could be for we've had, right? One of the things that you see is like doing one of these things right is difficult on its own, right? So if you look back in history and in my space of databases, it's well known that it was difficult, right, to get like cloud and that kind of stuff from the early days, to get that good. However, there's one big but, single T but. The is the it's 2024. So the state of the public cloud right now, the state of the tooling that we have and that we can use, is very different than, say 10 years ago. So building what we like to call cloud native, what does that mean? It means that it's containerized and that's a certain control. So the way that our serverless infrastructure manages, the control planes manage the database, that's the same levers that it's using as our enterprise clouds, right? Or that people could do themselves with open source. So it's easier nowadays if you build infrastructure to to support through these multiple channels. Bear in mind, I'm saying easier. I'm not saying easy. I'm saying easier than, like, let's say 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a few great points. I mean, probably the most salient point for me is I remember a while back listening to a podcast from the HashiCorp CEO, and they had a great run, and they're still a phenomenal company. And market things change around some of their use cases, but I think during their prime scaling years, they did a lot of things right. And one of the things he illuminated was talking about if you can own the conversation, you can own the market. And I think Weaviate's doing a great job of owning that conversation with the education to your point. And it's being delivered in a way that is relevant. Some people like code, some people like videos on LinkedIn, some people like Andrew Niggs like classes. And there's a lot of ways to divvy this up. And I think Weaviate's doing a phenomenal job at that. And to your
Thank
point,
you.
these yeah, of course. Like these enterprise sort of decision makers that have to take these tough decisions. I think, yeah, getting them that education is certainly the right strategy. We're building out similar initiatives at Ori. Our GPU cloud's around 9 months old now, so everything's still pretty new for us. But we've significantly scaled revenue and usage on the public and private cloud. By
Fantastic.
yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Um, I guess kind of moving away from the buying and needs process and how the markets evolve with storage and decision making and content, how do you see the organizations of the future winning with GPUs, with vector databases, even with RAG. I've been reading about uh RAG, a lot of different opinions on RAG. I'd say just I'll keep it high level there, but what do you think the strategies are going to be in 2025, 2026, especially given the AI native lens? How do you see this kind of panning out in your view, and what to avoid, what to double down on?
Yeah, so what I um and do you mean avoiding doubling down from our perspective or from the user's perspective?
I think maybe from a user's perspective, I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of tooling overlap. I mean, how do you see users narrowing down their decisions to make, whether it's with RAG or with Weaviate, with GPUs, any insights you have there? And how do you think the market will change around us heading into the next 2 years?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So first of all, um let's start at the beginning, right? So the beginning is that I could have never dreamt, and I find I feel a weird kind of pride when I see this happening, is that all these databases, also these databases that I look up to, right, from back in the days, they are they're integrating vector search in one way, shape, or form. I think that's fantastic, right? So that shows that there's a need in the market. Now, what we've also seen in the market is that it rarely happens, right? Just in general, that a database wins or infrastructure wins purely over such a feature or such a piece of functionality, right? Because if that would be the case, then everybody would be using Postgres, right?
Right.
And it turns out that that's not the case. So sometimes there's like a performance element to that or those kind of things, how it's structured. But I think what's more important has to do with the developer experience. So one of the things that I always say is it's like an avocado, right? So there's a pit, the pit of the avocado, that is the core technology. That avocado cannot be there without that pit, but it's the flesh that we eat, right? It's not the pit that we eat, and it's the flesh that is the developer experience, right? That's the soft, sweet thing we eat. And so that's the analogy that I often use for that. So then the question is like, how does that develop for a vector database, right? Like we've had. And what we believe, and what you can see is that we believe, and that's what's in the name here, is that the models and the database get more interwoven together. So for example, and there are many examples, but one example is like we work on this concept called generative feedback loops, where you basically give an instruction to the database, and that the database, together with the model, does stuff for you that you don't have to do manually anymore, right? It's like a RAG, but then that you feed data back into the database, or that the database itself can request something, or that the model can request something from the database if it needs that information to provide an answer or create content or those kind of things. And we're really heavily doubling down on that because I think that's where the market of what I like to call AI native applications are moving towards, and that's what we aim to power. That's what we try to do. And so far so good. So super proud to see all these and happy to see all these integrations and what people are doing with them. And it's just so much fun to really, lead the way from this AI native perspective. Goes back to the education part and the content stuff. We do a lot of work in explaining that to the world, and it's just fantastic to see developers build with that kind of stuff. So that would be my answer, how I see that develop and evolve over the coming years. But one last thing to say, one thing to think about it is I often take, for example, GitLab as an example, or GitHub, doesn't matter. These companies started as version control companies, but now
Right.
from that starting point, they were able to evolve into DevOps platforms because version control is just something you need for DevOps, right? But it's such a
Right.
core crucial part. So what we do, you start from the perspective of vector search and the vector index, which was hard to build, and we're still working on that, right? but that's your starting point. That's not the end point, that's the starting point.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think the next 2 years are going to be pretty exciting to see
That's going to be
how
great.
yeah some of these things pan out. I guess kind of last question that I had for you is if you were in a large enterprise today and you wanted to use Weaviate's kind of tooling, where do you think you would start? Would you start open source or would you try to get a license for your team, or what's that user journey look like for an enterprise who has these data sensitivities, these deployment sensitivities? What's like sort of the best next steps to get going?
Yeah, I think the again here I might give it a slightly different I will answer the question, but like maybe slightly different than you might expect, is the really doesn't matter. So whatever works for you. If you want to do it open source, great. You want to run it locally on your laptop, great. You want to immediately start a cluster, great. You want to use our serverless, great. You want to use a free sandbox, great. It's way more important is that, as you can see, for example, on a forum, very active, talk to us. Right. So
Right.
if you have questions, if we can help, if you want to work with the community, don't hesitate, reach out, because a lot of people just, I mean, yes, we have a lot of amazing production use cases, but those are the enterprises that are like really forward leaning in the kind of stuff, right? So if
Right.
you go like, hey, we're just a normal enterprise, we're not laggards, but we're just, we it's now is the time for us to adopt AI. We're here to help. We have seen stuff, we know stuff, we have information, we have material. So regardless with which deployment method you choose, we're here to help.
Yeah, I love that. I think we have a similar approach to the problem statement of just what's the best way to get going when you have interest but you're not quite sure because of the other stakeholders involved. I mean, I think
Yeah, of
for us,
course.
I mean, it's all about that flexibility and meeting people where they're at and providing them that education. So this has been great, Bob. I've really enjoyed this and
Thank
appreciate
you.
carving out the time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I love these questions. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, take care and thanks everyone for joining in.